Absolutely anything. I can make you dance.
It's 1965. Dinner's done, the family's around the TV, and the moment that theme song kicks in, you're somewhere else entirely. A tiny island in the Pacific, 7 lovable misfits, and a rescue attempt that somehow always fell apart at the last second. For 3 seasons, Gilligan's Island was exactly that. Then, without any warning, without any goodbye, without even a proper finale, it was gone. The cast didn't know. The creator didn't know. And neither did the millions of people still tuning in every week. That's the story we're telling today. The rise and fall of Gilligan's Island, why it was canceled without warning.
Thanks a lot, Gilligan. Well, are my clothes dry yet?
A little too dry, Skipper.
Part 1. The Man with a Crazy Idea. Before there was an island, there was a lecture hall at New York University. Sherwood Schwartz was sitting in a public speaking class sometime in the 1930s when his professor asked the room a simple question. If you were stranded on a deserted island, what one item would you take with you? Most students answered and moved on. Schwartz couldn't let it go. The idea stayed with him for years. Through his work as a comedy writer on The Red Skelton Show, through his Emmy Award win for writing in 1961, and through his years contributing to My Favorite Martian in the early 1960s. He kept turning the desert island concept over in his mind. What if, instead of just one person stranded out there, you had 7, all from completely different walks of life? A millionaire, a farm girl, a movie star, a professor, 2 sailors, and a housewife. All of them stuck together, with no way home, forced to figure each other out. Schwartz saw it as something more than a comedy. He called it a social microcosm. 7 people representing different slices of American society, all learning to cooperate. It was a simple idea dressed up in coconuts and bamboo, but it meant something to him. In June 1963, Schwartz sat down with CBS executives to pitch the concept. The meeting was, by most accounts, a strange one. James T. Aubrey, then president of CBS Television, threw paper airplanes across the table as Schwartz spoke. Aubrey liked the characters of Gilligan and the skipper well enough, but he didn't want an island show. He wanted a traveling boat, a series he pitched as Gilligan's Travels, where the crew would visit new ports each week. No castaways, no stranded premise, just a couple of sailors wandering the globe. Schwartz held his ground. He believed the whole point of the show was the isolation, the fact that these people couldn't leave. Without that, there was no comedy, no tension, no story worth telling week after week. CBS chairman William S. Paley and executive Frank Stanton were both in that room. And apparently Schwartz made his case well enough that the meeting ended with something like cautious interest from the network. Then came the pilot.
I'm gonna marry that native girl.
Skipper, they don't want you. They want Gilligan.
You hear that, Skipper? They don't want you, they want Gilligan.
Part 2. Getting to the Air. The pilot episode, titled Marooned, was filmed in Hawaii in November 1963. The timing was unlucky. The last day of shooting happened to fall on November 22nd, the day President Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. Out of respect, the crew included a shot of a U.S. flag at half-staff in the background of the opening sequence, and it remained there throughout the entire run of the series. CBS rejected the initial cut of the pilot, then a second version, then a third. Each time, Schwartz went back and reworked things, pushing for permission from United Artists to try again without network funding. The fourth version was the one that finally broke through. It was the first cut to include the opening theme song, a folky sea shanty that Schwartz co-wrote with composer George Weil. The song did something that almost no TV theme had attempted at the time. It told the entire backstory of the show in under 60 seconds. The pilot was delivered to CBS on a Friday, just before the network was set to announce its fall 1964 lineup. Executives screened the new version over the weekend, ran audience tests, and by Monday morning, Gilligan's Island was on the schedule. But the cast that would actually appear on television was quite different from the one in that original pilot. Only 4 characters survived the transition: Gilligan, the skipper, and the Howells. Played by Bob Denver, Alan Hale Jr., Jim Backus, and Natalie Schafer. The other 3 characters were replaced entirely. A high school teacher played by John Gabriel became the professor, now portrayed by Russell Johnson. 2 secretaries named Ginger and Bunny gave way to a Hollywood movie star named Ginger Grant and a farm girl named Mary Ann Summers, played by Tina Louise and Dawn Wells, respectively. Schwartz's first choice for Gilligan had actually been Jerry Van Dyke, Dick Van Dyke's younger brother. Van Dyke turned the role down flat. He wanted his own show, not a spot in an ensemble. Bob Denver, who had already built a fan base playing the beatnik Maynard G. Krebs on The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis, stepped in and made the role entirely his own. Tina Louise came aboard under somewhat murky circumstances. Her agent reportedly sold her on the idea that the show was essentially about an actress stranded on an island, implying she would be the star. Schwartz always denied making any such promise, pointing out that the show was called Gilligan's Island, not Ginger's Island. Louise showed up on set expecting one thing and got another, and the tension that created would follow the production for 3 full seasons. The series premiered on CBS on September the 26th, 1964, airing on Saturday nights at 8:30 p.m. The very first episode went up against Bonanza on NBC, one of the biggest shows on television at the time, and held its own. Critics were not kind. Jack Gould of the New York Times called it quite possibly the most preposterous comedy of the season. But audiences didn't care. They tuned in, they laughed, and they kept coming back.
I can't believe it. We've been rescued.
I can't believe it either. It's the Mosquitoes, my favorite musical group. I thought you said...
Part 3, Life on the Island. Once the show settled into its run, it found a rhythm that worked beautifully for the audience it was speaking to. Each episode followed a recognizable structure. The castaways would come agonizingly close to rescue or escape, and Gilligan, well-meaning, bumbling, irredeemably clumsy, would somehow unravel the whole plan at the last possible moment. That joke never stopped working, because the show understood that the audience wasn't really watching for the rescue. They were watching for the characters. The ensemble was the whole game. Bob Denver's Gilligan was a kind of innocent, perpetually confused, perpetually apologetic, but never malicious. Alan Hale Jr.'s skipper was bluster and warmth in equal measure, a father figure forever exasperated by his first mate, yet never actually able to stay mad at him. Jim Backus and Natalie Schafer as the Howells were a comic masterclass, 2 people of extraordinary privilege trapped on a patch of sand, somehow maintaining every social pretension while building their furniture out of bamboo. Russell Johnson's professor could construct a radio from coconut shells and yet couldn't patch a hole in a boat, and the show was cheerfully aware of that absurdity. Dawn Wells played Mary Ann as the most grounded person on the island, warm, practical, unpretentious. An audience affection for the character ran deep. According to Bob Denver, Wells received somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 fan letters a week during the show's run. The chemistry between the cast was genuine, and it showed. Hale and Denver in particular developed a comedic double act that drew conscious comparisons to Laurel and Hardy. Hale would frequently break the fourth wall, looking directly into the camera with a look of weary exasperation after Gilligan had once again destroyed their best chance of getting home, a move borrowed straight from Oliver Hardy's playbook. The show filmed its lagoon scenes on a specially constructed set at CBS Radford Studios in Studio City, California. The crew reportedly spent half of every workday filming in that lagoon. Beach scenes were shot at Zuma Beach in Malibu. The studio built the lagoon at considerable expense, and it remained standing long after the series ended, not demolished until 1995, when it was finally converted into a parking lot. One of the more peculiar footnotes from the early episodes, when the show first aired, the opening credits listed only 5 of the 7 cast members by name. Russell Johnson and Dawn Wells were lumped together at the end as simply the rest. The story, long circulated among the cast, was that Tina Louise had pushed for no one to be listed after her name in the credits. Bob Denver found the slight genuinely offensive on behalf of his colleagues and personally went to the producers to demand that either their names be added or his be removed. The producers added them. Starting with the second season, the theme song properly named The Professor and Mary Ann. The original theme song recorded for the first season was performed by a folk trio called the Wellingtons. For the second season, Schwartz slightly reworked the song, and it was recorded by a different group, the Eligibles. The Wellingtons, for their part, did end up appearing in the show itself, guest starring as a Beatles-inspired band called the Mosquitoes. One other small historical detail worth noting: the pilot episode's original theme music had been written by a young, still largely unknown composer credited as Johnny Williams. That same composer would go on to score Star Wars, Jaws, Schindler's List, and a long list of other films under his full name, John Williams.
Me?
Oh. All we need is a handful of loyal followers. We take their minds and put it into the...
Part 4. The battles behind the camera. The creative tensions on set were real, even if they rarely spilled into what audiences saw on screen. The most persistent source of friction was Tina Louise. She had come to Gilligan's Island believing she was signing on to something that would make her a film star. Instead, she found herself playing a walking glamour gag in a silly sitcom, and she never quite made peace with it. Her relationship with Sherwood Schwartz was strained throughout the entire run. Her character of Ginger was originally conceived as a sharper, more hard-edged temptress, but Louise refused to play it that way. She pushed for Ginger to be reworked as more of a Marilyn Monroe type, softer and more comedic. Schwartz agreed to the compromise, and Louise was professional in front of the camera. But the bitterness simmered underneath. It wasn't just Louise. On one occasion, CBS executive Hunt Stromberg Jr. watched the pilot episode alongside Schwartz and stopped the screening to pitch an idea. When Gilligan climbed a tree to look around the island, he should find a dinosaur he could keep on a leash and walk around as a pet. "It's our answer to Mr. Ed," Stromberg reportedly said. Schwartz and his fellow producers dutifully entertained the suggestion the way you do when the suggestion comes from someone with authority over your show. The dinosaur never made it to the screen. There was also the constant pressure from CBS to keep the show moving. The network shifted Gilligan's Island through different time slots across its 3-season run, changing its night and hour multiple times. In its first season, it aired Saturday nights. By the third season, it had settled into Monday nights at 7:30 p.m., where it served as the lead-in for the rest of CBS's Monday lineup. The show was still winning its time slot against the Monkees on NBC, even in its final weeks, a fact that makes what happened next all the more difficult to swallow. Despite everything, the critics, the time slot shuffling, the internal tensions, the show connected with viewers in a way that was undeniable. At its peak, it was regularly among the most watched programs on American television. Audiences, especially young ones, simply loved it. The ratings may have dipped by the third season. The show ranked 44th out of 101 programs for the 1966 to 67 season, but it was still holding its own. Nobody on the production side believed the end was anywhere close.
Explosives explode.
Part 5. The renewal that wasn't. During the filming of the third season, CBS executive Mike Dan personally congratulated Sherwood Schwartz on the show's renewal for a fourth year. Dan was the head of programming, the person whose job it was to make those decisions official, and he told Schwartz directly Gilligan's Island was coming back. The cast was told the news. They celebrated. Dawn Wells and Russell Johnson, feeling secure about the future of the show, each went out and bought new homes. The production continued to operate under the assumption that a fourth season was a certainty. In fact, the show appeared on CBS's internal schedule documents for fall 1967. There in black and white, one of the network's planned entries for the new television year. Then weeks passed, and more weeks, and Schwartz still hadn't heard back from CBS Business Affairs, the department that formally issued contract renewals. He started asking questions. The answers he got were evasive. What had happened in the background was a bureaucratic mess that nobody at Gilligan's Island had any part in creating. Gunsmoke, the long-running Western that had been a cornerstone of CBS's schedule for 12 seasons, had been quietly canceled in early 1967. The decision was made by James T. Aubrey, who cited declining ratings and a show that had simply gotten long in the tooth after more than a decade on the air. It was a defensible call on paper, but it was made while CBS chairman William S. Paley was away on vacation. When Paley returned and learned that Gunsmoke had been cut, he was furious. According to Sherwood Schwartz's account in his book Inside Gilligan's Island, Paley demanded immediately that the show be renewed. His wife, Babe, a longtime devoted fan of Gunsmoke, had reportedly been equally outraged when she learned of the cancellation during that same vacation. Dawn Wells, in a 2013 interview with Esquire, recalled the story as she understood it. What happened was, Gunsmoke was canceled and we were moved into their time slot. Mrs. Paley, the wife of the board chairman, had been on vacation when Gunsmoke was canceled, and when she got home, she said, "You can't cancel Gunsmoke." Paley ordered CBS Business Affairs to go back to the Gunsmoke cast and crew and reinstate the show. The problem was that the initial cancellation had already set things in motion. Agents had been notified, actors had started making other plans, and contracts had lapsed. The reversal cost CBS dearly. Several Gunsmoke cast members successfully renegotiated higher salaries now that they knew how badly the network wanted them back. An emergency session was called at CBS to sort out the scheduling disaster. The network needed to find a Monday night time slot for Gunsmoke, specifically the 7:30 p.m. slot, which happened to belong to Gilligan's Island. A new series called Doc was also canceled to make room. And just like that, Gilligan's Island was off the schedule. The cast didn't find out in any formal, dignified way. They were on vacation when the news broke, the same vacation they had taken fully believing they were coming back to work in the fall. There was no call from the network, no goodbye from the executives, no wrap party, no acknowledgement of 3 years and 98 episodes of work. They simply stopped being employed. Schwartz was furious. He pointed out, among other things, that Gilligan's Island had been performing better than Gunsmoke had in recent seasons. He pushed back through whatever channels were available to him. It made no difference. Paley didn't like Gilligan's Island. That was well documented. And with Gunsmoke needing a home, There was no incentive for anyone at the top of CBS to fight for the little island show that the critics had been mocking for 3 years anyway. The final episode of Gilligan's Island, Gilligan the Goddess, aired on April 17, 1967. It ended exactly as every episode before it had, with the castaways still stranded, still marooned, still no closer to home. There was nothing in that episode to indicate it was a series finale. No farewell, no resolution, no rescue. It was written as just another installment of a show that was supposed to keep going. The castaways didn't get off the island, and thanks to the abruptness of the cancellation, they never would. Not in the original series anyway.
Let's drink to that.
Oh, I'm sorry, Miss Ginger. Ain't got no time to drink. I gotta guard my duck.
Part 6. What Gunsmoke Did Next. For the record, CBS's bet on Gunsmoke paid off, at least in terms of ratings. Moved to the Monday 7:30 p.m. slot that had belonged to Gilligan's Island, Gunsmoke found an entirely new audience and jumped back into the top 5 of the Nielsen ratings for the 1967-68 season. It stayed in the top 10 for 6 consecutive seasons after that, and ultimately ran for 20 seasons before finally ending in 1975. By any measure, it was one of the longest-running primetime dramas in American television history. Whether it was worth the trade is a different question. Gilligan's Island, ranked 44th at the time of its cancellation, was still winning its time slot. The show's ratings had come down from their peak, but they were stable, and the production had every reason to believe a 4th season could have pulled them back up. The cast was in place, the chemistry was intact, the audience was still there. All it needed was the chance. That chance never came.
Dr. Boyer. Please, I do not have time for the chit-chat, doctor. I hope I have not arrived too late, huh?
No, of course, of course.
Part 7. The Afterlife of a Stranded Show. What happened after the cancellation surprised almost everyone, possibly including the executives who had made the decision. Gilligan's Island went into syndication through United Artists, and it became one of the most repeated television series in history. Stripped across local stations as after-school programming throughout the 1970s, the show found a massive second audience of children who hadn't been alive when it originally aired. By the time those children were old enough to have kids of their own, Gilligan's Island had already been on the air in reruns for the better part of 2 decades. Journalist Laura Morowitz, writing in the book critiquing the sitcom, described it as the most repeated series in television history. The critics who had savaged the show during its original run found themselves increasingly isolated. What they had dismissed as mindless fluff turned out to be strangely durable. People weren't just watching it out of nostalgia. They were discovering it fresh, laughing at the same jokes, and developing genuine affection for the same 7 characters. Something about the premise worked in a way that the original broadcast window had never fully allowed the world to see. The animated world came calling first. The New Adventures of Gilligan ran on ABC Saturday mornings from 1974 to 1977, with most of the original cast providing their own voices. Dawn Wells couldn't participate due to touring theater commitments, so she and Tina Louise, who again declined to be involved, were both voiced by actress Jane Webb. A second animated series, Gilligan's Planet, ran from 1982 to 1983 and took the premise to a genuinely absurd conclusion, sending the castaways into outer space after building a rocket ship. All of the original cast participated except Tina Louise. Wells stepped in to voice both Mary Ann and Ginger. The television reunion movies arrived in 1978, when NBC aired Rescue from Gilligan's Island. It brought back Bob Denver, Alan Hale Jr., Jim Backus, Natalie Schaefer, Russell Johnson, and Dawn Wells. Tina Louise, consistent with her long-standing reluctance to revisit the show, declined to appear. The character of Ginger was recast for the film. The movie imagined the rescue the original series never delivered and depicted the castaways trying to readjust to modern life. It performed well enough that 2 sequels followed: The Castaways of Gilligan's Island in 1979 and The Harlem Globetrotters on Gilligan's Island in 1981. These movies weren't prestigious productions, nobody pretended they were, but they gave the cast and the audience something the original cancellation had denied them: a chance to say goodbye on their own terms, to see the story move somewhere new, even if just for a couple of hours. The castaways finally got off the island. It took 11 years, but they made it.
Check on that henna shampoo that I... Good heavens. 2 gingers.
Part 8, The Cast They Were and Where It Led. The 7 people at the center of Gilligan's Island were bound to that show in ways that were complicated and, in some cases, costly. Bob Denver never shook Gilligan, and by most accounts, he eventually stopped trying. He remained warm and approachable about the show throughout his life, doing personal appearances with Russell Johnson and Dawn Wells well into his later years. He passed away in September 2005 at the age of 70 from complications related to cancer treatments. Alan Hale Jr. was, by all accounts, one of the most genuinely good-natured people ever to work in television. His castmates adored him. He maintained friendships with all of them, held the group together through the years after the show ended, and carried the skipper's warmth off-screen as naturally as he did on. He died on January 2nd, 1990 from thymus cancer. Jim Backus had a career long enough and varied enough that he resisted being defined by any single role. He was already famous before Gilligan's Island as the voice of Mr. Magoo, the nearsighted cartoon character who had been a cultural fixture since the late 1940s. Thurston Howell III added another dimension to a body of work that was already substantial. Backus passed away in July 1989. Natalie Schafer, who played the imperious and endlessly entertaining Lovey Howell, was famous for guarding her true age with ferocious dedication. She had come to television from Broadway and film, and she brought a kind of theatrical precision to every moment of broad comedy the show demanded. She died in April 1991. Russell Johnson brought a real steadiness to the professor and to the ensemble as a whole. Bob Denver often described Johnson as the group's calm center, the person everyone gravitated toward when tensions got high on set. Johnson survived a World War II plane crash as a young man, a fact that seemed to give him a certain perspective on things that his castmates found grounding. He passed away in January 2014 at the age of 89. Dawn Wells became in many ways the keeper of the show's legacy. She spoke openly and affectionately about the production for decades, participated in reunions and appearances, and wrote and produced a documentary about the show in 2001. She had a warmth and accessibility that made her beloved well beyond Mary Ann specifically. Wells died in December 2020. Tina Louise lived a life consciously separate from Gilligan's Island, largely refusing interviews about the show and declining participation in reunions and movies for decades. She eventually softened somewhat, appearing at the TV Land Awards ceremony with her castmates and making a guest appearance on Roseanne in 1995. But she never made a full peace with the role the way the others did. Her discomfort was real, and it was never simply about ego. She genuinely believed the show had cost her the kind of serious film career she had been building before she signed on.
Why don't we vote? You know, like an election.
Election?
Part 9, The Legacy. Sherwood Schwartz spent years after the cancellation trying to get Gilligan's Island an ending it deserved. He pushed for the reunion movies. He wrote extensively about the show's creation in his books Inside Gilligan's Island and, later, Gilligan's Island. From creation to syndication. He watched as the cultural conversation around his creation slowly, gradually shifted. From the critics who had dismissed it as irredeemably dumb to the scholars and cultural commentators who began taking it seriously as a social document. Paul Canner, a professor at the University of Virginia, wrote an analysis of Gilligan's Island as part of his book Gilligan Unbound, arguing that the show was a kind of Cold War parable, a case for American democratic ideals dressed up in slapstick. The island, Cantor argued, was named Gilligan's Island precisely because Gilligan, of all the castaways, had no inherited claim to authority. He was the democratic ideal, a person of no rank, no wealth, no special talent, who nonetheless led by accident and by virtue of his fundamental goodness. Schwartz himself confirmed in 1997 that the show's underlying concept, people from different backgrounds being forced to get along, was something he considered the most important idea in the world. The original pilot episode, filmed in November 1963 and never aired, finally made it to television on October 16, 1992, nearly 29 years after it was made. Broadcast on TBS. Audiences who had grown up with the show got to see where it had started and how much it had changed in the process of becoming what they knew and loved. Gilligan's Island was still airing in reruns somewhere in the world every single day of every year for decades after the last original episode. The show that ended without warning, without a farewell, without even the basic courtesy of letting its cast know it was over, turned out to be one of the most watched programs in the history of the medium. The castaways never did get off the island in the original run, but the show itself, it never really left. So, that's the full story. A show built on a classroom question that a writer couldn't stop thinking about. 7 characters who became as familiar as members of your own family. 3 seasons of genuine laughter cut short by a scheduling decision made thousands of miles away from the bamboo huts and the lagoon. The people behind Gilligan's Island deserved better than the way it ended. The cast deserved better. And frankly, the audience did too. But here's what the numbers eventually proved. The critics were wrong, the network executives misjudged it, and the audience, the real audience, the one that counted, had known all along exactly what they had. If this look back at one of television's most beloved and most abruptly canceled shows brought back some good memories, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you want more stories like this one, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next.